Bapak Jonathan Lasa dari Charles Darwin University. Jika sudah ready, boleh dimulai, Pak.
Sudah ya. Baik. Makasih buat Ibu Moderator. Just want to check whether you can hear me.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so I will share my screen. I hope you can see my screen by now. Yeah, so I would like to check again whether you can see my screen. Hello.
Please go ahead.
All right.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So, yeah. So thank you, Mas Yana. Thank you for the opportunity for me to speak about UBI. I feel privileged to share the session today. I'll probably mix Bahasa and English from time to time. Apologize for those who might not speak Bahasa a little bit. I was not aware that there are international participants. So, right. So, basic questions that we need to.
Jonathan, just to interrupt you, sorry.
Yeah.
Why don't you make a presentation in Bahasa? Because only 3 or 4 of us cannot follow Bahasa, but I have a translator that is translating. Then you will
All right.
make it easier for many of the audience.
Right. That's cool. Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. So I'll speak in Bahasa, but I think you can see my screen in English. So I think it's a combination. Right. So thank you for the suggestion. I will speak in Bahasa. Oke, so Bapak Ibu mungkin salah satu pertanyaan yang selalu diajukan ketika negara-negara di dunia negara middle income countries ataupun yang dianggap negara miskin ketika kita bicara soal UBI, pertanyaannya apakah possible, apakah mungkin? Karena untuk existing social protection aja tidak cukup kapasitas untuk bisa berkelanjutan. Sedangkan UBI menuntut mungkin lebih tinggi daripada social protection. Menurut saya bukan masalah itu possible, tapi menurut saya itu pertanyaan yang salah. Yang bisa kita ajukan adalah bagaimana itu bisa dilakukan. Jadi menurut saya share the same passion dengan teman-teman proponents bahwa UBI adalah sesuatu yang perlu dan sebuah instrumen yang penting untuk pembangunan berkelanjutan. I think my position is quite clear. So the rest of my argument adalah soal bagaimana kita melihat contoh di negara lain yang belum sepenuhnya mengembangkan UBI, tapi mereka nggak jauh dari versi UBI yang dibayangkan ideal. Walaupun tidak ada satu versi tunggal UBI yang menurut saya bisa dipaksakan di mana saja, karena konteks selalu penting. Nah, ini saya coba bicara dua negara ya. OZ di situ Australia maksudnya. Sorry for the informal English. Saya kebetulan dari NTT dan saya tinggal di Darwin hampir 8 tahun dan kita punya teman-teman Indonesia yang mungkin ada 2.500 orang di Australia, di Darwin khususnya, yang sebagian saya tidak mau bilang sebagian besar, tapi significant amount of them adalah resipien daripada welfare ya, dari Australia. Dan kalau teman-teman membayangkan sebuah kehidupan yang dalam paradigma Martha Nussbaum bicara soal hidup yang ideal, itu cukup makan, cukup pakaian, jadi sandang pangan papan misalkan. Papan pun disediakan oleh pemerintah misalkan. Dan istri saya dan saya, kita sering kali joke bahwa teman-teman yang penerima social welfare itu kebanyakan mobilnya lebih bagus dari kita yang kerja dan di tax 35% setiap bulan. Dan mereka juga menikmati hidup yang menurut kita, at least based on our bias, karena tetanggaan, hidupnya juga nggak buruk-buruk amat. Padahal mereka mengandalkan Centrelink kita bilang, atau welfare payment. Memang ada satu masalah yang menurut saya cukup kurang bagus di welfare payment, itu ada conditionalities yang tadi sempat dibahas oleh beberapa pembicara di sesi sebelumnya. Di Australia misalnya, setiap penerima itu harus memberi laporan, harus, ya. Ya, jadi mereka harus memberi laporan setiap 2 mingguan bahwa mereka melamar kerja misalkan. Kemudian ada teman-teman yang, salah satu teman kami, dia rohaniawan yang hidupnya disupport dari welfare, dan ada beberapa yang seperti itu. Dan mereka dilarang juga untuk menerima tambahan, misalkan ada persembahan dari ketika mereka jadi pembicara di sebuah tempat. Nah, model Australia menurut saya terlalu rigid untuk social welfare-nya, for not all for bad reasons, but it's not ideal. Kemudian menurut saya juga dignity-nya perlu dibikin lebih dignity lagi. Kemudian I think they need to allow more freedom untuk orang juga bisa exercise their agency untuk look for more tanpa penalize karena dapat lebih. The question is around justice to the taxpayers yang membanting tulang misalkan, dan itu isu yang akan selalu menjadi isu hangat di pembicaraan terkait UBI. Nah, jadi pemberiannya juga perlu dipikirkan, tapi juga memang sentimen sosialnya perlu dipikirkan. Itu dari pengalaman Australia. Sedangkan di New Zealand misalkan, salah satu yang saya dan keluarga saya sempat pikirkan saat ini adalah kita lagi pikir apakah menetap di New Zealand atau tetap balik ke Australia. Misalkan kalau di New Zealand, kalau kita harus meninggalkan New Zealand, kita rugi karena sistem pembayaran pensiun di New Zealand itu kecil banget. Employer-nya hanya bayar 3 atau 4%. Sedangkan di Australia, employer-nya bayar minimal 9,5 sampai 17%. Jadi, tapi yang bagus dari New Zealand adalah ada semacam universal pension system. Jadi begitu teman-teman menginjak umur 65 dan sudah memenuhi syarat tinggal minimal 10 tahun di negara bersangkutan, teman-teman entitled to pensiun. Walaupun bukan warga negara, presiden pun terima 100 gaji yang sama. Dan itu semua pensiunan bisa double gaji. Jadi menurut saya mereka, New Zealand dan Australia, punya dua model yang berbeda, tapi nggak terlalu jauh dari pembicaraan soal universal basic income. Nah, pertanyaannya adalah bagaimana dengan negara berkembang, khususnya Indonesia? Dari perspektif evolusi sosial, Ini debatable ya, karena ada yang mengatakan bahwa kita kan masih bergerak dari social development yang sangat dasar, baru transisi ke social protection system yang lagi getting mature. Jadi ada banyak skema ya, teman-teman seperti Pak Yano mungkin lebih paham untuk menjelaskan. Tapi intinya dari non-welfare model menuju ke welfare model, terus dari welfare model itu lebih gampang untuk reaching the next level, misalkan UBI. Jadi UBI dibayangkan sebagai sebuah model welfare yang lebih superior daripada welfare model yang ada yang sekarang. This claim is debatable karena kita belum lihat model UBI yang operasional dalam skala yang signifikan untuk bisa di compare sebagai bentuk social policy yang sama. Menurut saya debat ini tetap penting, tapi juga nggak harus menarik kita untuk bertanya soal bagaimana Indonesia. Nah, tentang optimisme terkait Indonesia, konteks di Indonesia, salah satu skenario optimis itu sebenarnya tahun 2019-2020. Sebelum, menurut saya sebelum Jokowi tergelincir dalam godaan kekuasaan yang entah bagaimana tak terkendali kemudian. 2019-2020 menurut saya, terutama di awal-awal COVID, Indonesia sebenarnya cukup punya social protection program yang not perfect, too many overlap, but ideally all the capacity itu sebenarnya bisa di reorganize, kemudian di redesign menjadi basic income. Menurut saya cocok banget di masa-masa COVID juga. Di tahun 2018 itu ada 2 bencana besar di Palu dan NTB, yang kalau teman-teman mencermati beberapa cash transfer program yang di sana, itu sebenarnya mereka semacam, kalau bahasa Inggrisnya kita bilang resembling some kind of UBI. Hanya memang juga ada model-model conditionality yang memperlambat respon bencana. Jadi saya dari awal, kenapa saya spesialisasi bencana dan saya melihat bahwa UBI is the best model untuk respon ke bencana, karena you don't have to deny citizens needs to access needs. Yang kita lihat di conditionality pasca bencana 2018-2019 itu kadang-kadang karena militer juga terlibat, kadang-kadang ketika orang mau minta bantuan yang mereka udah hilang KTP-nya masih diminta ID card misalkan. Tanpa ID, your relation with the state is not being recognized. Jadi bencana kemudian menceraikan relasi citizen dan state. Nah, menurut saya UBI lebih powerful dibanding humanitarian cash transfer, karena humanitarian cash transfer model kerjanya itu para international responder harus mengikuti rule of the game yang sudah disepakati oleh case working group dengan Kemensos misalkan. Jadi mereka kemudian harus ikut pendaftaran dan ada proses survei, verifikasi dan sebagainya untuk orang bisa dapat akses bantuan misalnya. Menurut saya itu terlalu lama dan kurang kemanusiaannya. Jadi dalam skenario optimis Indonesia ini, saya coba untuk membayangkan pathways daripada dari jejak langkah yang mungkin bisa kita buat untuk Indonesia ke depan. Policy pathways untuk UBI di Indonesia seperti apa? Oke, jadi saya membayangkan ada pendekatan yang mungkin agak susah diterima, ya, ini radical approach. Radical approach ini kita anggap aja semua existing social security policy, social protection policy, kita anggap nggak baik, kita replace dengan something totally new. Secara politik, I think it's impossible. Secara fiskal, kita nggak punya, terutama setelah rezim yang baru ini, dan kemudian rezim sebelumnya boros di infrastruktur dan kurang invest di human development di masa-masa 2022, 2023, 2024. Karena begitu banyak sumber daya pembangunan diarahkan ke kepentingan politik. Dan sosiali pun challenging ya. Sosiali cukup challenging karena saya cukup frustrasi di beberapa forum intelektual, misalkan dari NTT dan yang nasional, itu beberapa teman-teman yang bahkan doktor, mereka merasa bahwa yang social protection aja mereka anggap udah salah, misalkan Jamsos, apalagi UBI yang sifatnya lebih radikal. Dan itu salah satu yang saya terus menggumuli bagaimana caranya framing yang lebih bermartabat, lebih masuk akal, yang bisa diterima oleh teman-teman. Atau mungkin memang beberapa grup intelektual kita memang nggak mungkin bisa memahami itu, karena mereka datang dari latar belakang yang susah untuk mencermati bagaimana pentingnya UBI buat pembangunan masa depan dunia, terutama di negara-negara berkembang. Karena kita sebelumnya membayangkan bahwa robot akan menggantikan sistem produksi. Robot akan menjadi bagian integral dari sistem produksi pertanian. Di Indonesia hal ini nggak bisa dibayangkan karena yang dimajukan bukan AI dan robot, tapi yang disodorkan adalah Babinsa. Jadi ketika dunia lagi menuju kepada pertanyaan-pertanyaan yang sifatnya futuristik, ketika robot menggantikan peran manusia dalam sistem produksi baik manufaktur maupun yang akan menggeser begitu banyak labor, begitu banyak tenaga kerja, dan akan mengakibatkan begitu banyak pengangguran. Pada saat yang bersamaan, robot juga cukup signifikan. Minimal dalam 15 tahun ini, saya sempat training summer course di University of Hohenheim, dan juga saya kembali ke Potsdam 2015 dengan topik yang similar. Itu di tahun-tahun segitu, 15 tahun lalu ya, 12 tahun lalu ya. Tapi bahkan jauh sebelum itu, pembicaraan soal bagaimana robot menggantikan peran manusia itu udah sangat gencar. Dan kita bayangkan itu baru akan terjadi 2050, tapi ternyata kemudian penggantian tenaga kerja manusia oleh robot itu akan terjadi mungkin lebih cepat dalam 10 tahun ke depan. Jadi akan begitu terjadi banyak pengangguran, dan kalau robot menggantikan secara substansial, signifikan, untuk replace tenaga manusia, pertanyaannya bagaimana negara memberi kesejahteraan? Solusi satu-satunya adalah menurut saya UBI menjadi solusi, walaupun variannya bisa banyak dan bisa dikontekstualisasikan. Jadi yang sayangnya di Indonesia saat ini, pembicaraan yang sifatnya futuristik ini gelap, karena kita nggak terlalu engage, elit kita nggak terlalu engage di dalam membayangkan masa depan yang akan terjadi, yang sebentar lagi secara radikal manusia akan digeser oleh AI, manusia akan digeser oleh robot, dan seterusnya. Yang terjadi saat ini adalah secara naif, Prabowo menggeser militer masuk untuk mendorong produksi, which is menurut saya sangat kurang masuk akal. Oke. Itu constraint politik untuk konteks hari ini. Mungkin 5 tahun lagi mata akan terbuka. Dan yang mungkin kita bisa lakukan pertama adalah tweaking current social protection. Jadi saya nggak merekomendasikan sesuatu yang radikal. Tapi menurut saya kalau Mas Yano dan Sadi dan teman-teman diberi kesempatan, mungkin kita bisa meredesain ulang sistem social protection yang ada. Jadi semua pembicaraan soal constraint mungkin bisa di hold down dulu, dan kita provide alternatif operational scenario dengan sumber daya yang sama. Mungkin itu bisa jadi suatu pembicaraan, dan itu butuh teman-teman ekonomi untuk modeling proses bagaimana dampak daripada redesign basic income. Kita nggak betul-betul merubah total, tapi kita bisa embedding BI dalam bentuk payment for ecosystem services yang dieksperimen oleh teman-teman di climate change misalkan. Jadi membayar para penjaga hutan bagi orang-orang yang ada di front line untuk mereka dapat income. Kita lihat itu udah banyak embedding business basic income into humanitarian cash transfer misalkan, atau embedding BI into jump source. Atau mungkin kita juga mau soft sedikit karena kubu yang mengkritik basic income juga kuat, terutama dari kubu-kubu yang pro universal basic services. Karena untuk apa basic income-nya ada kalau basic service-nya betul-betul sama sekali nggak ada. Atau nanti spending-nya akan habis juga di basic, ya covering basic service. Jadi ini kayak tambal sulam yang nggak terlalu mudah untuk bisa dilakukan. Nah, tetap dibutuhkan champions, eksperimen dengan champions di skala lokal. Saya rasa Indonesia mungkin masih yang cukup gencar untuk konsisten melakukan ini. Nah, yang perlu dipikirkan adalah dua hal menurut saya. Pertama, challenges di perception. Dari middle upper class ini menurut saya cukup susah untuk ditanggulangi. Kita tahu cara argumennya, tapi nggak mudah untuk membuat mereka percaya pada argumen yang kita punya. Kemudian para pemuka agama dan scholars juga punya counter argument yang bilang orang malas lah, membuat orang kebergantungan dan sebagainya, bertentangan dengan nilai-nilai luhur sosial dan agama misalkan. Bukannya beri ikan tapi beri bukannya beri pancing tapi beri ikan. Itu narasi-narasi yang susah kita tepiskan dalam bentuk yang sederhana. Yang paling terakhir menurut saya, imajinasi soal universal basic income kita harus bayangkan ulang, jangan terlalu benchmarking dari Eropa dan sebagainya. Karena kalau teman-teman baca-baca buku dari eksperimen-eksperimen yang ada, itu kan eksperimennya cukup bagi Indonesia cukup futuristik. Karena misalkan kalau teman-teman ke New Zealand dan hampir setiap kota kecamatan itu punya library, punya museum, punya toilet misalkan, punya hampir semua features yang menopang untuk orang bisa bangun kapabilitasnya. Nah, itu kita nggak punya. Jadi kalau dia punya waktu luang yang lebih besar untuk tidak memikirkan soal cari makan, atau seluruh mental bandwidth-nya dia nggak harus disedot untuk memikir soal akan kelaparan. Setelah dia dapat uangnya, dia bikin apa misalkan. Nah, kegiatan-kegiatan produksi maupun reproduksi, termasuk art dan sebagainya, itu hanya mungkin bisa berkembang kalau ada konteks empowerment ya. Jadi ada sebuah agenda penyerta kalau bahasa saya. Agenda penyerta ini bisa bentuk-bentuk nudging dari pemerintah untuk empower orang-orang yang penerima. Jadi jangan hanya habis dikonsumsi misalkan, tapi juga bisa aspiring themselves to study more misalkan. Atau karena mental bandwidth-nya bisa secure untuk hal yang lebih strategis tentang dia dan masa depan dia. Mereka bisa kita semacam menciptakan sebuah ekosistem kelembagaan atau ekosistem yang produktif untuk mereka juga human development-nya bertambah, sehingga kemudian pemerintah bisa melihat bahwa basic income kemudian punya return value ke development. Nah, teman-teman akan di kubu-kubu basic income ini kebanyakan menurut saya ada kelompok yang betul-betul sangat fundamentalis. Jadi sebuah imajinasi yang mungkin terlalu Eurocentric. Kita perlu mencari yang model Indonesia, tanpa harus anti kepada Eurocentric maupun model-model di Barat. Tapi tantangannya adalah bagaimana juga menghadapi masalah transparansi, depolitisasi dari UBI, dan juga beberapa resistensi yang nggak gampang untuk kita cover. Dan mungkin sebagai penutup, karena mungkin setengah jam aja ya. Sebagai penutup, saya rasa ini sebuah debat klasik untuk Indonesia saat ini. Kita sedang menuju kepada authoritarian paternalisme, tapi juga paternalisme modelnya adalah ignorance. Jadi bukan paternalisme yang sifatnya petingginya memikirkan bagaimana nasib rakyat secara keseluruhan misalnya. Saat ini menurutku kualitas politik kita sedang menuju kepada kemerosotan yang jauh di bawah sebelum 2001. Jadi kita kembali kepada mungkin beberapa teman blame kembali ke Orde Baru. Menurut saya kita harus tetap pertahankan semangat libertarian paternalisme. Jadi semangat libertarian daripada UBI-nya itu bahwa setiap orang berhak untuk menggunakan income yang diberikan tanpa banyak syarat, tanpa conditional. Tapi menurut saya tetap ada faktor paternalisme yang perlu dilakukan, yakni UBI perlu juga di-nudge untuk ada semacam social return daripada investment yang dibikin. Tanpa itu menurut saya kita nggak mungkin memenangkan debat di tingkat diskurs dengan policy makers di Indonesia. Mungkin tepat waktu. Terima kasih. Kembalikan ke saudara moderator. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih Pak Jonathan. Mungkin saatnya kita diskusi ya. Jadi teman-teman, Bapak Ibu yang ingin menanyakan mengenai dari paparan John atau Jonathan untuk 3 orang penanya. Oke, pertama Kak Ruth. Oh ya, 2, 3, ada lagi? 4, 5, oke banyak ya. Oh itu ada. Kak Ruth, langsung aja. Untuk dua-duanya.
I'm exploring different type of basic income mechanism around the world, such as universal basic income, negative income tax, conditional cash transfer, and partial basic income. I'm wondering whether every country is truly suitable for implementing universal basic income, considering each nation unique characteristics such as productivity level and labor force structure. For example, would UBI be suitable for a developing country like Indonesia, given its current economic condition and workforce dynamic? Even it seems ideal in theory, would it place a heavy burden on the state budget, especially for a country with limited fiscal capacity? And doesn't it also clash with the labor characteristic of developing country where informal and low skill work is still dominant? Perhaps it would be appropriate for developing country like Indonesia to adopt alternative mechanisms such as partial basic income, which are more affordable and better aligned with the local context. And there are any previous studies showing that developing countries are capable to implementing basic income in way that allow the state to benefit economically and avoid financial loss. And I believe that basic income can create a multiplier effect in long term. However, from a cost-benefit analysis perspective, it is possible for a country to avoid financial losses even in the medium or short term. I think I agree with Mr. Joe. We need to find a basic income model that is suitable for Indonesia.
Next question.
Um, Thank you so much for that question. I'm assuming it's for me, right? Not to Jonathan. Yeah. Okay. So there are a set of questions here in the implementation, finding fiscal space, and comparison. So there are a lot of questions. I'll try to answer some. Um, you're right that there are different variants that have been proposed, such as negative income tax, conditional, unconditional cash transfers, partial basic income, etc. But what stands out about UBI is the 5 principles that we stick to, that it should be given to individual in cash, periodically, and unconditionally. So these 5 characteristics separate these other basic income variants, and we should be very careful about the other ones, because the 5 principles have emerged over a long time with a philosophical, with a long philosophical discussion, that behind each of these principles there lies a pillar. For example, when we say unconditionality, it supports freedom, that you cannot dictate terms to somebody when you are giving something to someone, then it becomes transactional. So out of this long struggle of discussion and debate, we've stopped here with these 5 principles. So BN is considering how to redefine basic income with emerging contexts in the world, because every day things are changing. There is digital currencies emerging. There are different such aspects. So, but as on today, we advocate for a universal basic income with these 5 principles. But having said that, each country has its own limitations, and it might not be possible to begin with a basic income that promises all the 5 characteristics. But it's always good to start implementing whatever principles of these 5 is possible in the existing policy. Like Jonathan says, right, within the what the pathways to UBI in Indonesia, he was saying that within the existing welfare schemes, how do you see what is already intersecting, and how do you convert that into a basic income so that you remove the limitations of the current public policy. Now, I believe that there is always resources. It's the priority of the governments that have to be reallocated. Now, most countries across the world spend ridiculous amounts giving tax reliefs to the corporates. They spend a lot on, injecting money into public sector undertakings that do not function efficiently, right? And in each of these countries it differs, but the government continues to do certain things for its own rent-seeking activity. But if such reallocation happens, that's when we can truly fund a UBI without having to worry about doing anything. Some people ask, should we borrow it? Should we print extra? And would this not cause inflation? Different kinds of questions that repetitively come again and again. But the one thing that we say is, it's at the end of the day a matter of redoing our public finance systems. That means we sit and see, where are we currently spending, and does this represent the population? Now, you've mentioned that a lot of informal workforce exists in our countries, right? And across Global South and across Asia Pacific, this is the situation. Not just informal, there is invisibilization of work. That means if you take a lot of sectors, people, first of all, they do not enjoy social security. They do not enjoy a safe minimum wage, and minimum wages do not get updated for a long time. We are talking about a living wage these days, but minimum wages get stagnant like that for decades. So, and stagnation in the real wages is another problem. And along with that, the informal workforce, is social security is one thing that the government has to promise and the employer has to provide. But 90 to 95% of work happens within the margins of formal, informal blurring of lines, and a lot happens on the side. And that and invisibilization, like the waste pickers, garbage collectors, persons, with disabilities, and then people who are from the marginalized communities, such as sexual, gender, indigenous populations, tribal populations. Sometimes states just reject to recognize people, and no services reach them. So in all of this, it makes sense that to come out of this welfare system that only promises if you work, that only delivers if you work, also in the formal sector, we need to create systems that do not support people based on whether they work or not, based on whether they contribute to the economy or not, but based on the mere fact that they are part of this country, that they exist, that they deserve to be treated with dignity, and that they have a sense of agency to do how they wish. And like I said, once UBI gets rolled out, the way the current work regimes function will change, because people will have the bargaining power to say no to underpay. So if you want to hire somebody with cheap labor, you can't do that, because they will say, I can get this money on basic income. You have to pay me rightly and fairly if you want me to work for you. Several policies across the world have proven that once there is a minimum, I mean, in India, there is this policy called Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. It says that in the entire year, for 100 days, you will have a guaranteed wage labor. So if you do not get work under that policy, you will be given a allowance. But the idea, the point I want to convey here is, once this has been rolled out, the farmers or the agricultural laborers said, we won't work for these peanuts. We should be given a fair wage. Otherwise, the feudal structures, the landlords, the rich, the powerful in the villages will say, you have to work for this, or you can just choose not to work for them. But now they had the choice to bargain for more, and this means the labor choices will improve. So that's another thing, that the informal structure that exists will also be able to engage with this support. And finally, about developing countries and developed countries. So we were conducting this meeting in India, and one of the ministers from Tamil Nadu, which is the southern part of India, a similar question was asked to him. So I quote that minister. He said, it's much more useful in a country, in a state where there are fewer resources, because running a government takes a lot of money. Running a government, sending public service delivery, managing employees, all of this takes tremendous amounts of money. And in fact, in all of our budgets, a lot of this goes to revenue side of expenditure. Within revenue also, non-capital expenditure. That means you're not creating anything out of this money, but merely giving salaries to employees, trying to have public service delivery. Once you have this system in place, all you need is functioning bank accounts, an agency that can run this, because all transfers happen digitally to banks. Everybody should have a bank account and it can get transferred. You do not have street bureaucrats who wield so much power in transferring this benefit from the government to the people. So territories or states or governments with perhaps lesser resources benefit more on UBI, because the expenditure on running the government itself and the expenditure to just transfer these resources to people will come down. And finally, I will reiterate that it's all a matter of initiative, it's a matter of will, and it's a matter of preference. Once there is a strong preference to the political parties, once they believe that this is an idea that works and whose time has come, then they will easily find space to, redo their public finance and get the money where it is how it is, however it is possible, because we've seen from the pilots and pilots run by social development sector and interventions done by the governments. So there are UBI like policies in so many places, if not exactly like UBI. In India, there are so many basic income variants given to women only. In South Korea, the government in a municipal council tried this through a card. Um, and in Brazil, you have Bolsa Familia that has been running for a long time. All of these have started. They all start with the idea that at the end, this should go into becoming a full-fledged basic income. But based on the current resources, the current political buy-in landscape, you just slowly do this. I will end by saying that that to understand a lot of these things, a pilot would be really helpful. Once we do a pilot in each region, for example, let's say we do a pilot in Indonesia. I mean, there have been pilots conducted in Indonesia, but pilots create that noise that within our own context, we have evidence to say that this works, to different people, rich, poor, working, non-working, of different genders, of different races, of different communities, and how it impacts on work choices, health, expenditure, coming out of poverty, all these things. So I really think pilots will give that opportunity for us to think about how we can place them in this context, and then the political class can see how they can scale it up at the national policy level. Yeah.
Dari Karut gimana? Oke, untuk Pak Jonathan masih monitor Pak. Apakah mau ada yang ditambahkan dari pertanyaannya Karut? Masih mute Pak.
Halo,
Oke, udah dengeran?
sudah. Ya, jadi aku sempat miss yang bagian akhir dari John. Tapi aku rasa pertanyaan dari Mbak siapa namanya? Saya lupa.
Ruth?
Mbak Ruth, pertanyaannya cukup kritis Mbak Ruth, cukup bagus. Dan itu pertanyaan yang sama yang kita lagi pikirkan bersama. Memang di 5 kriteria daripada basic income, yang pertama itu harus individu. Jadi mungkin untuk teman-teman yang di Indonesia perlu kita luruskan bersama dulu, walaupun mungkin ada yang udah lebih tahu dari saya atau lebih tahu dari Pak Yanu dan John. Basic income ini sebenarnya bukan aliran kiri ya. Dia prinsip nomor 1 yang transfer ke individu itu sangat kanan, itu liberal. Jadi dia semacam pertemuan antara kiri dan kanan kalau mau bilang. Jadi kenapa dia sangat kanan? Karena ide dasarnya adalah ide liberal, ke individu dan individual freedom. Sedangkan masyarakat kita masih sangat komunal. Jadi tantangan yang cukup besar adalah apakah ada model basic income yang menghargai collectivity atau menghargai. Jadi ini debat panjang di tingkat konseptual. Misalkan sejak awal Amartya Sen misalkan bicara soal basic entitlements, itu basic entitlement juga diletakkan di lokusnya individu. Jadi supaya orang jangan lapar, dia harus minimal punya akses langsung ke pangan. Kalau dia nggak punya akses ke pangan, dia harus punya pekerjaan. Kalau dia nggak punya pekerjaan, dia harus minimal berjualan untuk dapat income dan bisa beli pangan. Atau kalau 3 itu kolaps, minimal dia dapat transfer dari negara. Nah, posisi basic income itu ada di dalam proses transfer. Opsi keempat. Opsi keempat ini basic income datang untuk mengoreksi existing social protection model, social security model yang kita punya dan cukup banyak lubang di sini sana. Tapi janji basic income untuk memberi sesuatu yang lebih baik dalam konteks Indonesia itu pun sesuatu yang perlu teman-teman pikirkan bersama. Bagaimana caranya? Karena kita nggak bisa menegasikan sistem komunal yang ada. Dan kita juga nggak bisa semerta-merta menggeser individualisme sebagai titik sentral daripada UBI dalam sistem transfernya. Kemudian menggeser yang sudah kita punya, ya, ini sistem komunal. Jadi basic income dalam titik tertentu ini kan debat yang panjang. Apakah dia pro social capital atau dia anti social capital? Itu yang kemudian harus dibuktikan oleh teman-teman yang proponen social capital, proponen basic income. Kalau saya orangnya empirical, tapi juga pada titik tertentu saya sangat mencoba untuk melihat the beauty of basic income. Soal nanti universal, partial, or whatever model, modifikasi, I think you need to still ask yourself whether basic income yang ada di Europe dan seluruh prinsip yang mereka bangun, 5 prinsip misalkan itu, apa kita harus menerima mentah-mentah 5 prinsip itu, atau harus ada semacam modifikasi? Mungkin begitu. Makasih banyak Mbak Ruth. Kembali ke Mbak Septia. Thank you.
Oke, terima kasih Pak. Ada lagi yang Mbak Ruth clear ya? Oke, ada lagi yang mau bertanya tadi? Mbak boleh minta tolong dikasih mic-nya ke mana tadi? Ke mas-mas yang baju marun ya?
Terima kasih. Thank you. I'm Ari from Infit. I have question to John and Pak Jonathan. John, it's very interesting your experience and work for UBI in your country and as the case in Bangladesh. But I have question. How activity UBI for your case and your case as best individual, any best household for your case, and for your video we look the impact story best practices, but I have question. I think if you have maybe file story, it's how to learn and how to what challenge but from the file case, how to manage. I think you can share. It's more important to manage the strategy for the for your experience. And Pak Jonathan, saya ada pertanyaan juga gitu ya. Pertama, bagaimana how to manage risk from inflation jika UBI ini pasti ketika banyak uang beredar ya di tengah resource, kita resource scarce ya, tapi kalau resource-nya terbatas gitu, itu juga akan berimpact gitu ya. Jadi saya punya beberapa pertanyaan itu. Yang kedua adalah apakah dari pengalaman Pak Jonathan gitu ya, UBI ini bisa menurunkan motivasi kerja gitu ya. Saya beberapa waktu di Jerman, beberapa anak muda itu mereka menjadi peminta karena ada rasional, ada refugees ya, isu itu gitu. Jadi walaupun dia mendapatkan yang kedua adalah accountability, yang ketiga adalah accountability gitu ya. Bagaimana kita mengetahui gitu ya. Tadi ada potensial UBI di 2019-2020 itu memang potensial kita reform ya gitu ya. Tapi kondisinya berbeda. Bagaimana presiden pada waktu itu di akhir-akhir jabatannya kita lihat menggunakan potensial pendanaan yang itu atas nama dana presiden gitu kan, dengan menjadi praktek pork barrel gitu ya. Sebenarnya dana itu bisa ketika diefektifkan itu bisa menjadi bagian dari UBI yang tepat sasaran gitu kan. Ini melihat konteks rasionalitas politik kita saat ini gitu ya, itu menjadi challenge gitu. It's our question. Thank you.
Mungkin Pak Jonathan menjawab pertanyaan dari
Ya.
Mas Arif. Silahkan Pak.
Ya, makasih Mas. Oke, saya bisa ngomong ya. Ya, makasih Mbak Septi. 3 pertanyaan ya. Saya rasa tiga-tiganya untuk saya cukup. Yang saya coba cover yang terakhir ya, accountability. Jadi menurut saya basic income ini bisa jalan kalau mekanisme good governance ini bisa juga in place. Jadi ada partisipasi publik yang cukup besar untuk mengecek kebocoran misalkan. Karena setelah hanya berapa bulan setelah rejim Jokowi misalkan Luhut kemudian mengaku bahwa 500T untuk bansos dan program sejenis banyak yang fiktif. Tadi John sempat ngomong soal transfer ya. Menurut saya kalau di Indonesia yang kita memang sangat takuti ketika rejim menuju kepada otoritarian itu ruang untuk kontrol masyarakat sipil kan mengecil. Sehingga basic income kemudian bisa ditumpangi untuk rent seeking. Rent seeking yang paling parah itu kalau potensialnya di fiktif, account-nya fiktif. Itu sangat miris. Karena bagaimana caranya mengecek account yang nilainya ratusan juta atau puluhan juta orang. Itu tantangan yang cukup besar dari sisi accountability. Kalau yang dari 2 pertanyaan yang misalkan dari uang beredar, menurut saya kalau sepanjang dia nggak printing more money, menurut saya nggak terlalu signifikan dari sisi inflasinya ya. Mungkin teman-teman ekonomi yang lebih paham untuk menjelaskan relasi antara basic income transfer dan inflasi. Karena inflasi biasa datang dari, kalau di Australia paling banyak dari properti dan juga dari beberapa variabel termasuk pangan maupun geopolitik change. Soal nilai UBI dan kita nggak, kalau saya proposalnya tidak merubah secara drastis, tapi kita redesign existing social welfare system kita, kemudian dengan uang yang sama, jadi kita promise dengan uang yang sama kita deliver better outcomes dengan basic income framework. Itu salah satu yang kita coba gagas misalkan kayak pemerintah. Kalau terkait dengan menurunkan motivasi ini kan menurut saya akan selalu ada distribution ya, dan menurut saya mungkin distribusinya yang teman-teman bisa bayangkan apakah dia normal distribution sehingga kita bisa lihat tail yang satu dan tail yang satu. Jadi ada ekstrem yang bawah, misalkan ada beberapa, selalu akan ada yang menurunkan motivasi kerja. Tapi apakah memang itu normal distribusinya seperti itu? Model distribusi yang lain misalkan saya nggak bayangkan ya, karena mungkin nggak acceptable secara public policy. Mungkin normal distributionnya dari behavior itu perlu kita lihat dan belajar daripada eksperimen yang sudah berlaku. Terkait dengan refugee tadi saya kurang jelas apakah refugee-nya yang motivasinya kurang untuk mencari kerja atau orang lokal yang merasa iri dengan refugee yang dapat transfer. Kalau itu topik yang cukup lain lagi yang perlu public education. Menurut saya begitu, mudah-mudahan menolong. Tapi pertanyaannya cukup itu pertanyaan strategis yang harus kita pikirkan bersama. Makasih.
Gimana Mas Arif? Oke, John, you.
Arif, I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question? The question you asked me, could you repeat it once?
Yeah, John, I have 2 questions for you. I think for your practice, your experience, how the activity, the practice UBI, it's effective if the cash transfer in individual base or household. And second, I think if you have, I think bad story or failed story, it's for important to improve what the strategic and what the learn for us, what challenge from the field, and how to manage if you're at process in 20 months process, and you can tell the story for us.
So the challenges
Yeah,
is
yeah.
about the financial processing
Yeah,
challenges.
in UPI
Okay.
in your
Right.
in country. Thank
Okay,
you.
okay. Oh, I mean, I can definitely say that the running a pilot is not not a smooth one, because once you do a research design and then select a community where you want to do it, and from there ensuring that there is a financial inclusion, all of that is very long, laborious, patient work. But I have joined both the pilots at a center stage when all the process have settled, only cash transfers are happening. That's when I joined as a project coordinator. So, but I have I know how it has happened before I joined, so I can share some insights from that. So on the first question though, whether it is better individual based or household based, I strongly believe that it's time that welfare systems across the world should start identifying and recognizing an individual as the unit of a policy delivery rather than household, because it the idea to take a household as the policy unit comes from a state of it comes from a certain paternalistic patriarchal mindset, you know, because what about people who do not want to get married, or what about single women, or what about people who've separated, divorced? Now even you see, not just in government, even companies, corporates tend to incentivize families. You can take a family insurance that costs cheaper than you take individual. So but the good thing with doing an individual level basic income is, first, it puts the decision making power in your hands directly instead of a head of the family. Now, who is the head of the family differs between culture to culture, and in most societies, marriage, wedding, is not seen as a partnership. It's seen more as a hierarchy, where sometimes men is higher, women is not, and all of that. So in a situation like that, women get benefited more, and it is some kind of an affirmative action. So from my experience, we've seen that in a lot of cases, women have for the first time opened bank accounts. Sharath told that in Madhya Pradesh, women might have belonged to the rich part of the village, but they never had bank account, never managed money. The men were managing money. They come, all of them, the family is rich, but the women are not, because they don't own land or they don't have money, etc. So in that sense, making it individual brings that gender parity. Okay, whatever gender it is, that's one thing. Second thing is, individuals who are young, okay, someone might be 18 years or 20, whatever, and are eligible to vote, and they can do a lot of things because of that age. But families tend to exercise a certain moral power that stops people from taking the decisions that they want. It could be, I mean, whatever age one can grow into, but parents always try to, with good intentions though, say you should do this, you should do that. But in that process, we take away the agency of an individual, because at the end of the day, an individual knows what is best for them. With the community will definitely support, but at the end of the day, it should be a matter of choice for the individual. So that's why on both of those things, I think individual is the right thing to do instead of household. And another thing is, it's much more simpler in terms of efficiency also. once you make it household, uh, uh, I mean, uh, that's one learning we got, that it's much more efficient. You just have account to account transfer. And if the family wants, they will pool the money. They will decide how to collectively use it. And in our pilot, so many families have done that. They sat together, decided to put it together, and then decide how to spend that pool of money. So, so you are giving the choice to the family to pool it and use it, or use it at an individual level. Women can, start purchasing what they want instead of taking permission from the husband. Or and the final thing is, people will get an opportunity to say no to abusive relationships. Okay, if you want to end a relationship, you need, without a financial security, you cannot end a relationship. Similarly, if you want to start a relationship also, if you want to get married, start a family, you need a financial security. So in all these situations, I think individual makes more sense. And finally, the kind of challenges, in a pilot, you have to ensure that everybody has a bank account. They should have an identity card. And we did in Work Free, we sent 1 rupee to their bank and checked if they received it or not. So they have to tell us that they received it or not. If they received it, then we confirmed and started sending the money every month. That has been a huge challenge, because people are still using basic phones. They can't use apps to check their balance. They can't. Sometimes every transaction should get a message right on phone, credited, debited, etc. But in several cases, people still have to go to the bank to check about that transaction status. And banks did not allow people to open account easily, or banks did not believe in some cases that they got money. How can you get money? Where are you getting the money from? So the whole banking system itself needs to support and facilitate this. But this is inevitable. Everybody needs to have a bank account. So UBI also helps in creating that layer of financial inclusion, that everybody has a functioning bank account, and a way, maybe a phone or something, to check their financial status, etc. Apart from that, financial glitches, identifying the boundary of a community. People will say, our family is, some part of our family is living separately, or our cousins are living in the next slum community. Can you include them? You can't, because this is your territory. But that's a limitation for a pilot. But in a national policy, you do not have such pilots. And the most challenging is, it's not a limitation, but that keeps coming. And this is the last point. Everybody in the project, in the pilot, keeps asking us, will you continue the pilot? Will we again get money like how we got in the pilot? You do not have an answer really, because it's a pilot, it's for a limited time. You disburse the cash, but once it's done, it's done. So, and then we say that we've done the pilot to see how it works. And now it's our work to advocate this to the governments and see all of us get it. And the most encouraging is when we ask them, you have received it unconditionally and universally. Do you think a UBI should be given unconditionally and universally? A lot of the people, especially the poor, say yes, it should be given to everybody, not just to the poor. The rich will say, no, it should be given only to the deserving. It should not be given to this, that, or. But the most, people who use this and have benefited tell that everybody should receive money, because anybody can fall suddenly. Anything can happen to anybody at any time. It's very, very uncertain. So in that light, it was encouraging to see that most of our participants, almost everybody, said that a basic income should be given, if given universally and unconditional.
Oke, Bapak Ibu, karena memang waktunya mepet ya. Jadi pertanyaan Bapak Ibu yang mau bertanya akan kita kumpulkan dulu. Nanti akan dijawab oleh Bapak Jonathan ataupun John. Gitu. Ada lagi yang ingin mau bertanya? Bisa minta tahu? Jadi izin Pak John. Jika ada pertanyaan boleh bantu di catat dulu kali ya, nanti jawabnya di akhir gitu Pak. Oke. Silahkan.
Halo, my name is Siti Rodia from Kitabisa and Salam Setara. I have three questions. Number one, from your perspective, what are the key challenges in implementing UBI in Pacific or Australia or today? Number two, based on previous UBI pilot project in India, especially, what were the most significant lesson learned or unexpected outcome that differed from initial expectation? And number three, as a facilitator or program coordinator of the UBI pilot project, you referenced earlier in documentary, what action or strategies prove to be most essential or time sensitive during implementation? Maybe did the pilot include any intervention model or knowledge sharing components aimed to improve or helping beneficiaries develop a plan for using the cash transfer? Thank you.
Mbak sekalian di ini nih tertujunya untuk Pak Jonathan atau keduanya?
Ke
Pak Jo.
Pak John, dan nomor pertama untuk Pak John dan Pak Jonathan.
Oke.
Terima kasih.
Oke. Selanjutnya ini Mbak yang di depan. Dari tadi kayaknya yang di depan.
So, all right, thank you. So, the documentary is pretty good, showing how the project's running and so on. But I'm just wondering about, I mean, like, if I'm not mistaken, the project has ended in the last year. So probably I would just like want to know about how is the situations of these beneficiaries. I mean, like the ex-beneficiaries. I mean, like, how is the situation of their economic, or perhaps, do you think that the project is have what is it like change or help them to improve their economically after the project has ended? I mean, like, I'm good about that. Thank you.
Silakan.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Prima. I'm from Universitas Negeri Jakarta. I have three questions. Basically, I'm agree with the concept of basic income, but I curious about, is it possible if from the video we see that every you have cash, you have a program before it, like empowerment or capacity building. So do you think it is possible if only we just give a cash for every class in Indonesia, especially the first one? And the second one, how you evaluate this program? Because I don't see the evaluations of this program, and how you set the goal of this program and how you evaluate it. And the third one is, I'm curious about the 350 families that impacted as this program. Is this every families is successful for this program, or only 10%? You didn't mention it. I think these three questions. But for Pak Jonathan, I have one question. Pakai bahasa Indonesia aja ya, Pak.
Ya boleh.
Jadi yang menarik dari pernyataan terakhir Pak Jonathan itu adalah tentang social return of investment. Saya juga setuju dengan itu Pak, tapi menurut saya ada perbedaan konsep antara social return of investment dengan UBI sendiri. Nah, bagaimana sebenarnya Bapak melihat hal tersebut? Karena di Indonesia sendiri kalau kita ngomongin social return of investment, berarti kita melihat bahwa uang yang diberikan ke masyarakat itu adalah investasi dari negara, sehingga harus ada program pendampingan yang kemudian menghasilkan sesuatu gitu. Tapi kalau dari konsep UBI yang dari tadi saya pagi ikuti gitu ya, UBI itu adalah tanggung jawab negara terhadap masyarakatnya ya Pak. Di mana kemudian itu menjadi dasar pertama ketika masyarakat itu harus punya cukup dulu basic needs-nya yang dipenuhi oleh pemerintah sehingga dia bisa melakukan sesuatu. Nah, itu adalah dua hal yang berbeda. Tapi sebenarnya saya setuju dengan konsep social return of investment ini. Jadi saya mau lihat ke situnya. Makasih Mbak.
Ada lagi, Mbak?
Sebelumnya perkenalkan nama saya Grace dari Invit. Sebelumnya terima kasih banyak atas sharing dari John. Mohon maaf saya menyampaikan dalam bahasa Indonesia ya. Karena kalau dalam bahasa Inggris suka belibet. Terkait dengan case study dari India dan Bangladesh tadi yang kita simak sama-sama dari film Unconditional dan juga dari paparan dari Pak Jonathan. Saya sendiri sangat tercerahkan ya khususnya dari film Unconditional yang cukup memotret dengan jelas bagaimana positif impact dari UBI yang sangat berpengaruh ke kehidupan masyarakat, seperti misalnya mereka bisa kembali ke sekolah, bisa punya bargaining power, bisa memperbaiki mental health-nya mereka gitu kan. Nah, film tersebut memotret ya hal yang sebenarnya nggak saya sangka sebelumnya gitu, bahwa basic income yang diinisiasi ini bisa memberikan efek yang sangat positif gitu ke masyarakat, khususnya kelompok-kelompok marginal. Nah, sembari mengimplementasikan proyek ini gitu ya, untuk juga memunculkan banyak champion-champion atau best practice dari inisiasi basic income ini, ada beberapa hal yang ingin saya tanyakan juga gitu terkait misalnya, karena tadi kan juga sempat disampaikan oleh Pak John bahwa basic income ini juga membawa challenge tersendiri gitu, khususnya terkait dengan persepsi masyarakat gitu yang cenderung mungkin melihat UBI ini sebagai sesuatu yang skeptis atau sesuatu hal yang utopis gitu ya. Nah, ini bagaimana mungkin dari Pak John dan juga Pak Jonathan gitu ya mengeksplorasi dinamika advokasi terkait UBI ini ke negara-negara masing-masing gitu. Karena dari yang coba saya telusuri juga UBI ini belum ada global regulationnya secara khusus gitu. Dan sejauh yang saya ketahui negara itu agak sulit untuk mengadopsi sebuah inisiasi gitu ya. Kalau misalnya inisiasi tersebut itu tidak ada global regulationnya. Nah, bagaimana dinamika advokasinya sejauh ini? Dan kalau misalnya teman-teman dari Indonesia mungkin dari Indobik bisa mengeksplorasi juga sejauh ini advokasinya seperti apa sih untuk mendorong basic income ini supaya bisa diterapkan di Indonesia gitu. Mungkin itu dari saya. Terima kasih.
Oke, ada lagi? Satu lagi, Bu.
My question actually, that just follow up with the previous questions. Pak John, you said that the pilot project is essential for scale up in the nationwide. I just would like to ask, how about the socio-demographic characteristic in your study case? Because I'm just wondering whether this is male-dominated society or what else? I don't know, because if I look at that one woman, mostly on your whatever your program is mostly women involved in this case. Apart from that, I would like to ask whether the social structure also in this society. So what the relationship between individuals and society's member, because maybe there is a champion, because usually champion is play an important role in the successful of the program. I just would like to know about it. And also how about is there any capacity building before you run the program? Because this is the basic, whether you equip them with the what do you call it, with the skill or understanding about how to manage the income, and then how to what do you call it, marketing if they are looking for the income generating program. That's all. And also the last one is about how about the basic services, because I remember Pak Jonathan said that it's better to have the basic good basic services first before we have the UBI. That's all my question for Pak John. Thanks. Pak Jonathan, sedikit aja. Tadi dibilang ya ini memang apa namanya Pak, dalam satu sisi kita itu kan sudah banyak beberapa program ya Pak ya. Nah ini untuk kasus Indonesia nih Pak, bagaimana, apakah kita perlu mengepul ya program-program bantuan yang sudah ada, atau seperti apa, atau kita tadi Bapak bilang bahwa basic service-nya kita kuatkan dulu. Nah ini apakah ini kami ke sana atau seperti apa untuk kasus kita, karena kita juga ini tetap harus jalan mau bahwa kapanpun ini tetap ini suatu hal yang memang tadi dibilang radical approach ya, tetapi memang harus jalan karena bagaimanapun juga undang-undang SJSN kan juga mengamanahkan itu. Nah ini masalahnya sekarang bagaimana mindset juga ya dari orang supaya kita juga menghindari adanya moral hazard ya, karena seringkali ada bantuan tapi meskipun diserahkan kepada individu untuk memutuskan, tetapi kadang-kadang karena ketidakberdayaannya terutama ya ibu perempuan ini suka apa namanya diberikan atau digunakan oleh yang mungkin tidak seharusnya, mungkin ada faktor lain yang menghambat seperti itu. Nah ini kira-kira seperti apa Pak dengan kondisi kita seperti ini? Makasih.
Masih ada lagi? Oh, satu lagi ya. Oh, oke Ibu silakan. Berarti terakhir Mbaknya ya? Tujuh ya?
Ikutan saya sedikit aja.
Baik Bu, silakan.
Saya sebaiknya kemana ya? Mungkin ke Pak Jonathan dulu ya,
Oh, baik.
karena beliau tahu tentang Indonesia ya. Saya bahasa Indonesia aja deh, nanti belibet bahasa Inggrisnya. Terus ini mungkin Pak Jonathan, tadi ada film yang memang film yang disampaikan itu sangat menarik dan itu punya nuansa yang hampir sama dengan negeri kita ini, punya karakteristik yang hampir sama, jadi tampaknya bagus sekali. Tapi mereka successful dalam proyeknya, pilot project. Mungkin kita juga harus belajar dari mereka. Tapi khususnya saya dari tadi mungkin saya nggak menyimak, tapi saya sangat tertarik dengan kondisi negara kita ini ya, karena kita tahu kita punya culture yang banyak sekali ya, dan itu mendasari basic karakternya ya. Setiap budaya itu, setiap culture itu punya karakter yang berbeda begitu, punya dasar karakter yang berbeda yang kadang-kadang dibawa-bawa sampai kemanapun begitu. Nah, project ini kan universal basic income dan itu universal untuk siapa saja. Nah, tapi kita harus ingat juga nih Pak, bagaimana budaya kita yang terkadang tidak semua yang smart ya. Kadang-kadang mereka menggunakan dana yang mereka peroleh itu untuk konsumsi saja sejenak begitu. Oh saya untuk ini aja, untuk keperluan makan dan sebagainya. Emang untuk basic ya, basic needs ya. Tetapi maksud saya supaya UBI ini berhasil, karena saya tertarik dengan UBI ini, bagus sebetulnya programnya, supaya itu berhasil begitu. Bagaimana nih, mungkin Bapak punya pengalaman atau suggestions atau apapun yang bisa meminimum barriers-nya, cultural barriers atau problem budaya tadi atau hambatan kendala budaya ini agar UBI ini berhasil begitu. Karena ini sesuatu yang bagus untuk memenuhi basic, tetapi saya melihat dari tadi bahwa tidak hanya untuk konsumsi. Di filmnya siapa ini Bapak yang tadi Pak John itu untuk usaha-usaha ya, untuk macam-macam usaha yang digunakan. Nah, saya khawatir saja begitu ya. Kalau seandainya boleh UBI ya memang untuk apa saja tidak ada persyaratan, tetapi alangkah baiknya kalau itu untuk usaha juga. Namun tidak semua individu punya talenta untuk usaha begitu, punya keinginan untuk berusaha. Saya ingin menggali, maksudnya ingin menggali mungkin pendapat dari Pak Jonathan, atau boleh juga pendapat pengalaman dari siapa, Pak John ya, your experience how to minimize the barriers or obstacles or any problem regarding the cultural barriers begitu. Terima kasih.
Silakan.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So let me introduce myself. I'm Clara from UIG. So first of all, I want to say thank you to Mr. Jonathan and also Mr. John for a great opportunity to watch your movies and also great presentation. So I do really appreciate it. So I totally agree that basic incomes needs to be adapted to each countries in a local context. So as you know, Indonesia is a large country that approximately we had 83,000 village that we had. So what do you think? Most of the village in Indonesia that we have, what is it called? Like manage their own budgets, or in Bahasa we can call Dana Desa, if I'm mistaken. So do you think village funds could actually be used to try out the basic income at the village level? So that's for me. Thank you so much.
Ada lagi? Sudah ya. Sepertinya saya memberikan waktu untuk penonton terlebih dahulu ya Pak. Mungkin 1 orang 1 menit kali ya. Kan sepertinya dari 7 orang. Silahkan Pak.
Tanggapan ya.
Iya.
Oke. Ya, nggak semua kasih nama. Jadi yang saya ingat hanya Mbak Siti Rodia. Key challenges dalam implementing UBI dalam konteks Australia. Sebenarnya Australia belum sempat membuat UBI sebagai formal policy, tapi di konteks bencana ada yang namanya disaster payment. Kemudian kebetulan mahasiswa saya tulis tesis masternya soal disaster payment in Australia, dan saya sempat melihat beberapa wawancara dia dengan respon. Kebanyakan orang melihat disaster payment sebagai positif, kemudian yang COVID payment juga mereka melihat sebagai sebuah proses yang positif. Dan salah satu tantangan dalam implementasi lebih kepada political will kalau Australia. Dan political will-nya sangat bergantung pada pertanyaan yang berrelasi dengan nomor 2 soal social return of investment. Jadi walaupun filosofi dasar UBI lebih kepada kembali ke dasar prinsip social protection policy misalkan, yang mana itu hak warga negara, tetapi secara politik di Australia pun debat soal cost and benefit tetap ada. Dan kalau teman-teman lihat video yang tadi dari John di India, di akhir cerita, packaging ceritanya tetap menonjolkan soal betapa UBI lebih empowering dari sisi outcome. Jadi tetap ujung-ujungnya tetap ada sisi pesan social return of investment-nya juga, walaupun itu bukan tujuan utama. Jadi, tapi memang pertanyaannya dari Mbak, aku lupa nama Mbak dari UNJ, aku rasa value for money dari sisi public policy di tingkat debat public policy itu tetap harus ada. Ketika kita mau mengatakan bahwa kita harus fix welfare sistemnya, kita harus maju dengan dua economic modeling, dan kita harus melihat bahwa salah satunya yang diberi harus lebih powerful daripada yang mau dikoreksi misalkan. Jadi walaupun kita menghindari tuntutan untuk conditionality dan sebagainya, tetap di sisi cost and benefit daripada public policy tetap akan dituntut secara eksplisit maupun nggak eksplisit soal return of investment. Dan kalau teman-teman baca hampir semua promosi tentang UBI, kenapa dia lebih baik? Karena janjinya adalah dia lebih empowering dan return-nya lebih besar, social return lebih besar. Walaupun itu bukan tujuan utama, tapi hampir semua promosi menunjukkan. Jadi secara public policy dari sisi buying in dari pemerintah, kita nggak bisa menghindari promise bahwa yang di-offer oleh UBI is supposed to be better dari existing social welfare atau social protection policy, karena we wanted to fix the broken system yang ada di welfare maupun di social protection policy. Itu problem yang kayak ayam telur. Dari Dries soal dinamika UBI, saya rasa semakin banyak civil society yang mau komitmen untuk eksperimen dan advokasi UBI, kita bisa bikin UN terima ini sebagai sebuah agenda untuk didiskusikan dan kemudian bisa di-endorse. Saya rasa sejauh ini mungkin UNDP dan ILO ya yang mungkin jadi simpatisan, tapi mereka nggak bisa juga bawa menjadi sebuah agenda yang dibahas dan kemudian bisa ditentukan positioning dari UN. Saya rasa waktu COVID itu UN sempat highlight sedikit 1-2 berita soal UBI, ada beberapa postingan sempat saya lihat, saya nggak terlalu pelajari kemudian setelah itu. Tapi bagaimana ini kemudian menjadi agenda bersama, itu harus datang dari mungkin kolektif CSO secara global ya untuk ini. Tapi di Indonesia tantangannya adalah teman-teman yang saya anggap kiri justru anti dengan UBI, karena mereka merasa UBI ini sedangkan orang yang kanan merasa UBI ini kiri. Jadi bahasa universal UBI ini harus dan thank you Mas Yano dan teman-teman dari India yang sudah mencoba untuk promosi di teman-teman masyarakat sipil. Tentang pertanyaan yang ketiga, bagaimana mencegah moral hazard? Ya, jadi itu pertanyaan yang juga saya gemuli. Jadi kalau teman-teman meneliti soal, kebetulan saya tulis satu buku dan kemudian terlibat di 4 proyek soal social protection, case transfer, dan beberapa waktu COVID itu juga ada beberapa teman yang saya kolaborasi di Indonesia untuk wawancara hampir mungkin 150 orang dari sisi kualitatif interview ya. Bagaimana mereka menceritakan proses-proses seleksi di komunitas. Kalau teman-teman lihat itu bahkan Babinsa dan polisi terlibat di dalam proses seleksi. Siapa yang akan mendapatkan bantuan waktu COVID, baik bantuan non tunai maupun untuk terjemahkan di Indonesia cash transfernya itu diterjemahkan non cash transfer. Jadi yang terjemahkan untuk John mungkin harus hati-hati. Jadi bantuan non tunai itu sebenarnya bantuan cash ya, tapi maksudnya lewat bank. Jadi bahasa Inggrisnya tetap cash transfer. Jadi social policy kita di Indonesia banyak sekali terminologi yang agak membingungkan, maupun di bansosnya. Itu keputusan untuk siapa dapat apa itu keputusan bersama, dan kadang-kadang harus hadir polisi karena dianggap akan membuat semacam destabilisasi kalau ada yang marah karena mereka nggak masuk dalam pemilihan. Solusinya tinggal sebenarnya UBI, karena dengan demikian nggak lagi ada exclusion kan, tapi kan kemudian memang ada practicality soal fiscal capacity, nggak bisa cover semua ya, oke lah, cari jalan tengah. Tapi kemudian kalau teman-teman mencermati posisi ini di tingkat desa itu mereka pusing juga bagaimana terlibat. Jadi kepala desa kebanyakan kurang mampu untuk memutuskan secara leadership ya untuk imposing the kriteria yang sudah ditetapkan. Untuk pertanyaan yang kemudian bagaimana budaya soal konsumsi tadi ya, untuk basic need bisa juga jadi menghadapi cultural barriers, kemudian karakteristik terkait jangan hanya konsumsi tapi juga bisa pakai untuk usaha. Kalau itu kita nggak bisa terlibat karena kita go against conditionality yang sudah dari awal kita mau coba untuk tepis ya. Jadi dia masuk dalam kategori unconditional cash transfer sebenarnya. Jadi whatever they wanted to use, they use. Dan kalau mereka habiskan ke basic needs itu memang karena mungkin perlu, dan kita selalu percaya pada agensi daripada masing-masing. Walaupun secara teori ekonomi kita never believe bahwa ada fully rational human being, termasuk Bapak, Ibu, dan saya. Di yang paling terakhir soal village fund, apakah dana desa bisa dipakai untuk basic income? Ini yang jadi rumit sebenarnya. Mungkin bukan universal basic income, tapi bisa basic income untuk covering families yang nggak bisa di cover oleh programnya social protection dari dinas sosial. Secara umum, saya rasa ada satu pertanyaan yang saya belum cover soal bagaimana kita meredesain existing social protection policy. Jadi nggak semua harus kita tepiskan, karena beberapa social protection policy sangat spesifik. Misalkan untuk petani, untuk disability dan sebagainya. Tapi menurut saya tetap percaya bahwa kalau semua mayoritas daripada social protection yang ada bisa sebenarnya diredesign untuk kita masuk ke portfolio basic income. Soal nanti ada specific groups yang perlu ditelusuri secara spesifik, kita perlu lihat juga. Tapi ruang ini belum dibuka untuk dibicarakan, dan mungkin itu PR buat teman-teman yang NGO yang mau riset soal ini, dan mungkin bisa datang dengan sebuah skenario yang lebih matang dibanding yang kita diskusikan hari ini. Makasih.
Terima kasih Pak, sudah cukup. Kita persilahkan John terlebih dahulu ya.
So there are so many questions, so I'll try to keep my responses brief. I will be here in the training the next 3 days, so I hope some of the nuances that we've opened today, we will be able to catch up and discuss at depth in the conversations later we have. So I will go in the reverse order of the questions. So what if someone doesn't have the ability to run businesses or do entrepreneurship? How about that once they receive basic income? So not necessarily everybody has started a micro enterprise or something in our pilot. People have how it generally, there's a pattern that you can see in pilots, that people tend to first spend on household consumption, food, groceries, and things in your house. Then you slowly pull up and clear debt and become free. And then you simultaneously or parallelly or separately spend on kids' education. And then each of these needs you see, once they get ticked, then they go on to future and think about doing businesses, etc. But I completely agree that because I completely agree with the fact that not everybody is cut out to do businesses, because there is social capital required sometimes, or you just have to be extrovert. You have to do a lot of talking, marketing in business, and not everybody is cut out for that. But it gives you the choice to do it if you want to. Point number one. And second thing is, for example, one woman in the pilot, she had a loan on her house. Her house was mortgaged and she had to clear that loan. What she did was she put every month's money in one gold scheme. She went to jewelers and put this 1,000 rupees every month in that gold shop. So she has to pay for 12 months. The 13th month, they will add that's a kind of growing the money. So people are differently growing the money in their capacity and their wisdom, and saving it, pooling. There are people who said we pooled all of that money, and we thought we will use it at a time of an emergency. So this vehicle used to collect garbage from house to house. One day that broke down, and they needed a good amount to get it repaired. So they used this money, which was a security money. They kept it as a buffer shock, a shock to take that, absorb that shock. So they use that money. So I think it all comes down to individual preferences, but it gives you the ability to do whatever you want. But while having said that, there is a community learning also. Once everybody gets it, then naturally you tend to talk to your neighbors, right? How they are spending. At least we have observed this in the communities where the pilots have happened, that women would talk to their neighbors. Did you receive the money or not? How are you spending, etc. And in that process, a collective learning emerges. In Madhya Pradesh, for example, the previous village pilot, towards then, they all collected the money and created a seed bank. So otherwise, you have to spend at every cropping season in farming and buy the seeds. Now, the loan sharks will charge a lot of interest. Now the village came together and they created a seed bank, and they basically created a community business. You see, so there's no limit to how these things can pan out. So Clara asked a question about several villages having its own funds and whether these could be earmarked for basic income. I believe that in lots of countries, the decentralization of power from central government to state government and to these municipal or village level, these institutions often lack the kind of funding they need, the kind of functionaries. They do not have autonomy. Generally, parliament and the state governments makes laws, and they have all the power, the state government and the central government. But if properly given with resources, the local institutions will have a lot of power to do things because they know the local context better than someone sitting in the headquarters or in the capital. So yeah, if they have the resources, which is generally not the case, then it makes sense to do it that way. But I think funding always happens from the central financial levels. So I don't know. It's a very interesting question. I think we should explore that over the training. Thanks for saying that you've liked the documentary and you're interested to watch more. We have curated some lists of collection of documentaries. We'll be able to share those links with Yanu over the training. To be honest, there's a lot of growing literature on basic income. Earlier, the literature used to be on philosophy and economy on UBI. One of the speakers in the training, we met him yesterday at PKB party office, and he was saying that he couldn't understand the article because it's full of philosophy and economy, technical words, jargon, etc. But I'm trying to say that from there, we have come a long way where there is a lot of accessible stories, literature, films like these on YouTube, Vimeo, etc. And a lot of content on Instagram also. People are making reels. In fact, interestingly, one of the participants from the Transgender Basic Income Pilot made a reel, made a video of herself explaining what basic income is, and she just put it out on the internet. And it did not go viral, but it went into so many circles. And we were so happy because we did not expect a participant of a pilot project to do that, because they're under no obligation to do that. They're receiving the money and they don't have to promote the UBI or anything. It's not their job, but she did. And later she went to UK, to Bath, in University of Bath last year. Every year we have a basic income congress in different country. So, and we were able to facilitate her to go to that country, and she went there and spoke about her experience as a pilot participant, and all because it all started with that video reel, So I mean to say that there is a lot of experiences people are sharing on across social media. So we'll try to share that curated list, and that should be helpful to understand the nuances. The Mincom pilot, I guess, several pilots, what happens is sometimes they get stopped in the middle because the governments, if it's a government pilot, when the party changes, or they just abruptly stop it. In certain times like that, a lot of research that's done just gets archived, doesn't get analyzed. I watched a documentary that went into the archives and understood what has happened 30, 40 years ago. I think I'm talking about the Alaskan, Canada, right? Canada and Alaska also. This documentary, in Alaska, there is this dividend, right? So it went into the families and asked them, you have been receiving this from a long time, decades. Alaska has a decades of experience, right? And they asked, how did this help you back then? So all these experiences are very, very rich and meaningful. Demographic structure, ma'am. It's very, very, very hierarchical. There is gender. I mentioned about caste this morning. In India, the Hindu religion and its scriptures have a deeply problematic hierarchy in which is caste system. And somebody who falls at the lower end of the caste are called untouchable, which means you cannot touch them, you cannot see them, you cannot talk about, and if the air that touched them comes and touches you, it makes you impure. So that is the kind of regressive purity that is that existed in societies like India and in Southern Asian context also. And unfortunately, that has not completely gone out. So today, discrimination and marginalization has taken newer forms. You see, if in example, if you go to a one house. So in India, if you want to rent a house, and the first thing they will ask is, do you eat meat? What is your caste? All these questions, and they do not ask what your caste is. They'll ask, do you eat meat? Something like that. So this kind of exclusion is deeply entrenched in our societies, and it takes newer forms. Sometimes this exclusion is on gender, race. In societies like India and South Asia, caste, gender and sexual orientation, class, all of these things. So in a society like that, or any society, basic income gives an opportunity for the people who have been separated from wealth. You take any marginalized community, the black community in the US or the untouchables I've been talking about. They are not allowed to educate themselves. The schools that they go to are very bad in condition. They are not allowed to run businesses. And that has been the history, and that continues in neo-colonial, neoliberal ways of how these capitalism works. And in that context, basic income opens a small hope for people to be treated equally, like everyone else, on a similar foundation, and then have access to wealth, have access to education, have access to these, whatever is kept locked, what we call as gatekeeping, happens a lot in academia these days and everywhere. So then people will be able to slowly break down those walls, whether it is of caste, gender, patriarchy, whatever. There's a question about capacity building on income management, whether we have given any financial literacy training to the pilot participants or anything like that. That becomes the opposite of the idea of unconditionality, right? So we did not indulge in any kind of financial literacy training because the pilot itself stands on a core belief that people know how to manage themselves and they can do it. So yeah, there was no financial literacy component as such, or about how to manage their income. Sharath was saying, and there were several conversations today about this idea itself. If you just give money to people, will they not waste it away? Will they, if they are given training, will they be better placed to do this? The idea is good. The idea of a financial literacy is very good, because in so many societies, we do not include financial literacy in our education. We do not know how to invest money. We do not know where to take loan from. We do not know how to have a financial plan about our lives. What are, financial necessities will be in the future. Nobody teaches that in school, unfortunately. Therefore, everybody is deficient on that count, not just the poor or not just the marginalized. So, so I think this kind of financial literacy or income management should not be done along with basic income, because that doesn't go with the value system. It should be definitely placed in the whole curriculum, education. Even adults should be taught how to manage their finances, etc. So there's a question about how was evaluation done and what were the goals. There is a qualitative track, quantitative track, and we had an ethics board with which we formulated how we could do this pilot ethically. And on all the pilots I've mentioned, there have been ethics boards. So, and this is a longitudinal study, right? WorkFree is an 18-month study. And along with 18 months, we have done the plus, which is the community organizing, for 24 months. So few months before the cash started, we started organizing the community, and few months after the cash ended, we continued engaging with the community. And the community partner in WorkFree, which is Montfort Social Institute, they have been engaging with these communities for some time, and they will continue to do that. So this doesn't mean we just suddenly go inject cash and then suddenly leave that's not ethical. That's not how it was done. So a lot of churning of ideas has gone into it, and this plus element has been of some kind of a shock absorber and a way to build community engagement. And in the documentary, I said that the idea of this project is not just about cash. Along with cash, there should also be a relational needs-based community organizing, which will mean that we will not go there saying, I will save you from the problems, or I know what your problems are, but we'll just be on the side of you, like a friend, a partner, trying to understand and help as an equal partner. So from savior to partner, that's the journey we all went through. So there was a question about personal experience. So all the community partners, community coordinators went through a personal journey of transformation, that we started seeing people differently. We respect people for their needs and their necessities, rather than we impose what they deserve, they need. And finally, the three key challenges in UBI. I think Jonathan actually very well reframed the question. Do we need UBI, or how do we need UBI is not the question. How we should do UBI and how we should formulate is the question. In that direction, I think the most challenging part is really how do we convince the people, because there is a lot of misconception and stereotyping. How do we convince the governments? Because they're always running behind elections. Okay, if I do this, will I get votes in the election? If I do that, will I continue to stay in power? But I think we should push the governments to think long term and not just for your today's electoral needs, and ensure that we are doing a visionary exercise of building a newer society. So convincing the people, convincing the governments, and finally convincing the economists, because economists will always say that there's going to be inflation, there's going to be fiscal limitations, this and everything. But I believe that there are answers to all these questions, answers not just coming from pilot projects, but answers coming from, government interventions, literature, and sometimes mere reflection. If we merely sit and really reflect from our own experiences, we can debunk a lot of myths that surround UBI. And I think over the 3 days, I've seen the agenda for the 3 days. We have sessions on how to do advocacy on UBI, how to frame a pilot, how to strategically frame UBI before different stakeholders like media, politicians, academics, artists, activists, etc. I hope we'll be able to learn more things from our shared experiences. Yeah.
Finally, teman-teman, kita sudah di puncak kegiatan hari pertama ya. Oke, terima kasih Pak Jonathan atas presentasinya dan diskusi, dan John, thank you so much.